Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be looking into something maybe a little unexpected, the connection between autism and the criminal justice system.
Yeah,
It's not something you think about every day, but the more you learn about it, the more you realize it's something we should be talking about.
definitely. And I think a lot of people would be surprised to know just how much these two worlds really do intersect.
Yeah. And to really illustrate that point, we're going to be looking at an article today from Cheap ABA. It's called Autism and Justice Sensitivity.
Great article. Really lays out the issues.
Yeah, and one of the most startling things that it points out right off the bat is the statistic that individuals with ASD are 7 times more likely to encounter the criminal justice system
Seventh.
than the general population.
I mean, just let it sink in for a minute.
I-
That's huge.
It is. It really is. And when you see a number like that, it really does make you stop and think, what's going on here? Why is this happening? Is there something fundamentally wrong with the way our justice system is set up? Right. It's not just about individual cases or anecdotes. This points to a much larger systemic problem.
Exactly. And I think to understand this problem, we need to start by acknowledging that autistic individuals often experience the world in a very different way than neurotypical people.
Okay, so differences in perception and communication. How does that lead to encounters with the law, though?
Well, you have to imagine what it's like to be an autistic person interacting with, let's say, a police officer who's not trained in autism.
Okay, so there's a knowledge gap right there.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
an autistic person might not make eye contact, or they might stim in a way that seems unusual, or they might take a little longer to process information and respond.
And to someone who doesn't understand autism, those behaviors could easily be misinterpreted as suspicious or defiant.
Exactly. And that can lead to an escalation of the situation, which can then lead to an arrest, or even worse.
It's almost like a domino effect, starting with a lack of understanding and then escalating into something much bigger.
It is. And it's not just about the initial encounter with law enforcement. This lack of understanding can follow autistic individuals through the entire justice system.
From the interrogation room to the courtroom to even prison.
Exactly. And think about how overwhelming and stressful those environments can be for anyone, but particularly for someone with sensory sensitivities.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The bright lights, the loud noises, the unfamiliar procedures, it would be enough to make anyone anxious.
And for someone with autism, it can be absolutely debilitating. They might have a meltdown or a shutdown, which could then be misconstrued as noncompliance or even aggression.
So they're essentially being punished for their neurodiversity.
It's a terrible situation. And the article actually states that autistic individuals are 3 times more likely to be wrongly accused of a crime.
Wow, 3 times more likely to be wrongly accused.
Yeah, it's really disturbing. And it highlights just how vulnerable autistic individuals can be within a system that's not designed to understand or accommodate their needs.
It's almost like they're set up to fail from the very beginning.
In a way, yes. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to raise awareness, to advocate for change, because the status quo is simply not acceptable.
We need to do better. We owe it to the autistic community to create a justice system that is truly fair and equitable for everyone.
I completely agree. And I think the first step is education. Understanding what autism is, how it manifests, and how we can all work together to create a more inclusive and just society.
That's a perfect place to wrap up part 1 of our deep dive. We'll be back in part 2 to really delve into some of the solutions that are being proposed to address this problem.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so we've seen just how serious this problem is. Autistic individuals are facing a much higher risk of encountering the justice system and a much higher risk of being wrongly accused. And that's just not right.
Yeah, it's a major problem.
But it's not hopeless, right? I mean, the article does talk about potential solutions, things we can do to make the system more just and equitable.
Right, it does. It definitely does. And that's where things start to get a little bit more hopeful.
Okay, good. So let's talk solutions. What are some of the key things that we can do to address this issue?
Well, I think one of the most fundamental things, and this is something that the article really stresses, is training.
Training. Okay.
Yeah, we need to train everyone involved in the justice system. Law enforcement officers, judges, lawyers, everyone.
To recognize and understand autism.
Exactly. And to interact with autistic individuals in a way that's both sensitive and effective.
So this training is about more than just, checking a box. It's about really changing the way people think and approach these situations.
Exactly. It needs to be comprehensive.
Yeah.
It needs to go beyond just, textbook definitions of autism.
Right. It needs to be practical, hands-on, real-world scenarios.
Exactly. For
Yeah.
example, imagine an officer is questioning an autistic individual, and the individual is avoiding eye contact.
Yeah, That's a classic example.
Right. Now, an officer who's not trained in autism might see that as a sign of deception or guilt.
Right, because that's kind of how it's often portrayed in movies and TV shows.
Right. But an officer who's been trained in autism would understand that avoiding eye contact is actually a very common coping mechanism for autistic individuals.
It's a way to reduce sensory overload.
Exactly. And so instead of escalating the situation, the officer could adjust their approach, maybe dim the lights, speak in a calmer voice, give the individual a little bit more time to process information and respond.
So it's about recognizing that certain behaviors that might seem suspicious or defiant are actually just manifestations of autism.
Exactly. And that's where the training comes in. It helps to shift people's perspectives, to build empathy, to create a more understanding and supportive environment.
I like that. It's not just about protecting autistic individuals. It's about helping everyone involved to navigate these situations more effectively.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important point. This isn't about giving autistic individuals special treatment. It's about creating a system that's fair and just for everyone.
A system that recognizes and respects neurodiversity.
Exactly. And training is just one piece of the puzzle.
Right. What else needs to change?
Well, another really important area is accommodations.
Accommodations. Okay.
Yeah. We need to rethink the physical environment and the procedures within police stations, courtrooms, prisons, all of these places.
To make them more sensory friendly and accessible.
Exactly.
Mm.
Think about it. Most police stations are designed in a way that can be very overwhelming for someone with sensory sensitivities.
Yeah. Bright lights, hard surfaces, echoing sounds.
Exactly. It's a recipe for sensory overload, which can lead to anxiety, agitation, meltdowns.
And that can then escalate the situation even further.
Exactly. So simple changes like dimming the lights, reducing noise levels, providing quiet spaces, these things can make a huge difference.
It's about creating an environment where everyone feels safe and supported and able to communicate clearly.
Exactly. And it's not just about the physical environment. We also need to consider accommodations for legal procedures themselves.
Okay, like what?
Well, for example, the article talks about exploring alternative interrogation techniques that are less reliant on interpreting social cues.
Because that can be very difficult for autistic individuals.
Exactly. So instead of relying on, body language or facial expressions, which can be easily misinterpreted, we need to focus on clear and direct communication.
Using simple language, avoiding jargon, giving people time to process information.
Exactly. And this benefits everyone, not just autistic individuals.
Right. It makes the whole process more transparent and fair.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's about recognizing that the traditional one-size-fits-all approach to justice just doesn't work for everyone.
We need to be more flexible, more adaptable, more accommodating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another really important solution: specialized support services.
Okay. Like what kind of support services are we talking about here?
Well, things like autism-specific legal representation, advocacy groups that can help individuals navigate the complexities of the system, support groups that provide peer support and a sense of community.
It's about having someone in your corner who understands your unique needs and can help you through the process.
Exactly. And it can make a world of difference for autistic individuals who are often feeling lost and alone within the justice system.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's like having a lifeline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then finally, the article also talks about the need to explore alternative sentencing options.
Okay, so instead of just throwing people in jail, we need to think about other approaches that might be more effective and more humane.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that traditional punitive measures might not be the best approach for autistic individuals.
Right, because they might not understand why they're being punished, or they might not be able to cope with the harsh environment of prison.
Exactly. So the article suggests looking at things like diversion programs, community-based support therapy. That addresses the underlying challenges that may have contributed to the offense.
It's a much more rehabilitative approach.
It is. And it's based on the understanding that punishment alone doesn't always solve the problem.
Sometimes people need support. They need guidance. They need help to address the root causes of their behavior.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important shift in thinking away from punishment and towards rehabilitation.
It's about seeing people as individuals with their own unique needs and challenges.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that everyone deserves a chance to turn their life around.
So we've talked about training accommodations, specialized support services, alternative sentencing options.
Yeah.
It seems like all of these solutions are really about shifting the perspective from judgment and punishment towards understanding and support.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's about recognizing that autistic individuals deserve the same rights and protections as everyone else. and that our justice system needs to evolve to reflect that.
So if we were to sum all of this up for our listener, what are the key takeaways from our deep dive so far? It's easy to get lost in the statistics and the big picture stuff, but at the end of the day, this is about real people.
Yeah, absolutely. Real people with real lives who are being affected by these systemic issues.
And it's not just the individuals themselves, it's their families, their friends, their
You're right.
communities.
It ripples outwards. You can't underestimate the impact that this has on everyone involved.
And the good news is that we can do something about it. We've talked about some really concrete solutions: training accommodations, support services, alternative sentencing.
And none of these are pie-in-the-sky ideas.
Yeah.
These are things that are already being implemented in some places, and we need to see them expanded and adopted more widely.
And it all starts with awareness, right? With people understanding the issue and recognizing the need for change.
Exactly. We need to get people talking about this. We need to educate ourselves.
Mhm.
We need to advocate for change.
Because it's not just about the justice system either, is it? I mean, this whole conversation has really made me think about other areas of society where we need to do better in terms of accommodating neurodiversity.
Oh, absolutely. This is a much bigger conversation.
Yeah.
It's about how we design our schools, our workplaces, our communities.
It's about creating a world where everyone feels welcome and valued and supported.
Exactly. And that's a world that I think we can all get behind.
So to our listeners out there, I want to leave you with this question. What other systems in society might need a similar deep dive? Where else can we apply these principles of understanding and accommodation to create a truly inclusive world?
It's a great question. And it's one that we all need to be asking ourselves. Because the journey towards justice and equality for all starts with recognizing and valuing the unique perspectives and experiences of every individual.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. It's been an incredibly enlightening conversation, and I hope it sparked some new ideas and some new ways of thinking about these really important issues.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for being here. We appreciate you tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again for our next deep dive.